We'll start. I think we're in. Can I welcome everyone to the planning committee here today? There's 2 items on the agenda. We will go through the agenda first. Apologies for absence.
Chair, apologies for absence have been received from Councillor Thomas.
Thank you. Declarations of interest, anyone? Councillor Button.
Yes, Chair. On 4B, I was on the licensing committee that dealt with the licence for the property, but I have no predetermination on this application.
Thank you, Councillor Stupey.
Thank you. I should also state the same. Thank you.
Yeah, and I should also state that I'm a member of CAMRA, and put on one pub down is not in our policy, but I've got no judicial or anything against it or report. Anyone else? No, thank you. We move on in 2 minutes. Minutes of the last meeting. People are here. Do they agree they're a correct record? Thank you. Planning application. We'll move on to the first one. The first one is 4A, and it's 20 Colgate, which is on. Let me have a look. Page 11 of your agendas. And if I can ask Sarah to take us through the report, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application for the demolition of an existing public house and the construction of a 3.5-storey building to provide 15 1- and 2-bedroom flats on a site to the north of the city on Cowgate, which is to the east of Magdalen Street, just to sort of give you an intro. Before I go into the presentation, just to make you aware of the updates report since the reports were finalised. It's basically, there's been updated comments from the Conservation and Design Officer, which are in the updates report in full. As a result of that, there's a need for an additional condition, which I'll come to later in the presentation. There's also, since the report was finalised, there's been an amendment to the site plan to clarify bin collection and an additional window within the roof accommodation, which again I'll come up to in the relevant point of the presentation. So if you want to start the first slide, please. So here's the location plan. The site's outlined in red. To give you some context, Cowgate, it runs to the north, running east-west. Peacock Street is to the east of the site, running north-south. And then you've got Magdalen Street to the west, running north-south. And just off there is Edward Street, where the buses go around the corner there. That's it. So there's your context. The big sort of blank area to the south of the application site itself is the Roy's supermarket, department store, whatever you want to call it, building. If we go on to the next slide, it shows the context in aerial form. So the application site is sort of tucked away a little bit to the north of the bulk of the Roy's building. You can see Anglia Square, the bulk of Anglia Square to the west there. You've got the St Crispin's flyover to the south of the slide with the car park to Magdalen Street, and you can see then the rest of the context is sort of terraced housing. Next slide, please. If we go through.
Can you just point out that you said it's tucked away?
Oh, sorry, yeah. There's the site. Cowgate then runs east-west there. Sorry, yeah. It's tucked a little way in the shade. So here's the building on the site, looking from the northeast. So you can see the bulk of the Roy's building behind it. It's got the building sort of sits tucked back in the site. There's a forecourt that runs around it that was a mixture of a small amount of parking and beer garden, smoking area for the pub. There's also, you can see Cowgate in the foreground. There's some disabled parking bay provision there, and then beyond that, you can see the backs of the properties on Magdalen Street and the multi-storey car park to Anglia Square. Next slide, please. This is a view from the north, from Littlebull Close. So the building on the application site sits, like I say, tucked in to the foreground of the sort of quite dominant bulk of the Roy's building behind it. The next slide, please. This is a view from the south up Peacock Street. So again, you've got the bulk of Roy's on the left of the screen. You've got a view of the end of the terraces, two-storey terraces on the right of the screen. And then the pub building is sort of just beyond that tree, tucked away behind its forecourt. There, that's right. And then sort of those buildings in the distance are properties to Cowgate that stand, and Littleball Close that stand some a further distance back from Cowgate itself. The next slide, please. This is a view from the west along Colgate, so it's the back of what the former pub. You can just see there the delivery yard with those two cars in it for the Roy's supermarket. And then you've got the pub building and then the terraces beyond that, two-storey terraces beyond that. This is from the east, so from the other side of Cowgate, so you've got the two-storey Victorian terraces, and you've got the application site building, the bulk of Roy's behind it, and Anglia Square multi-storey. And then the next one is a similar sort of context, but a little bit further away. So this is sort of defined as a negative vista in the conservation area appraisal, with the termination of your view there of Anglia Square, and the application site sort of sits in the foreground to that context really. So that's the end of the photographs. Just now to give you a little bit of a historical context, because that is important in terms of the sort of design and form of the development that's come forward on the site. This is a Ordnance Survey plan from 1905. The application site's outlined in red. So you can see the terraces that we talked about on Cowgate and Willis Street are there at that time. The application site would have had similar sort of terraces that are built right up to the edge of the back edge of the footpath. A lot of this was demolished. There was bomb damage, I think, during the war, and was demolished after the war. But that's the context of which the applicant has took their designs forward. Next slide, please. There's a bit of an aerial photograph from the north. So a building that stood on that site before was a three-storey terrace property that ran around the corner. But you see that in the context of a lot of terraced housing in the area. That's from 1926. Here's a photograph looking north up Peacock Street, so where we had Roy's in that context. This is what used to stand there in the late 30s, three-storey terraced properties, perhaps a mixture of residential with perhaps some access to yards and a mixture of commercial there. So three-storey properties quite hard up against the back edge of the footpath. And then the final photograph is the sort of Cowgate context. So on the corner would have been a pub called the St Paul's Tavern. So there you can just see the edge of the pub, which would have been three-storey, and then it dropped down and continued as two-storey terraces along Cowgate. Next slide, please. So the application itself is the red line in the application site there, and you see the building that is proposed to occupy the site will cover quite a large extent of the site, with just a small area of courtyard to the rear with some landscaping within that. If we move on to the next slide and look at the elevations, so these are the main street frontage elevations. So the top one is from Cowgate, the bottom one is from Peacock Street. What's proposed is a 3.5-storey form building. So you've got 3 full stories of accommodation with a 4th floor of accommodation within the roof, and it runs round the corner. So they're seen in the context there of the 2-storey terrace properties, and also of the larger, more dominant bulk of the Roy's building. On the bottom elevation there, you can just see at the very right-hand side the outline of a property there. That's referred to in your report as number 31 Cowgate. That is a 3-storey property, and it's just really showing you the context of this form against that. It's ever so slightly taller than that. So we're looking here at we've got an eaves height of 8.4 metres, whereas Cowgate's got 31 Cowgate's got 8.1 metres, so it's ever so slightly higher. The roof form here is we've got a couple of small dormers and then roof lights that serve the roof accommodation. We've got frontage development, so we've got access from the ground floor units directly from the street. If we go on to the next slide, this is the rear or courtyard elevation. So when you were looking from sort of the Roy's delivery yard, you've got the termination of the pitched roof, and then we've got these two curved gables, and then there's a sort of large rear clad dormer on the back and a rear entrance there that would take you to the upper floors of the development. Here's the site plans, the floor plans. So across, like I say, we've got 11 one-bed and 4 two-bed flats across all 4 floors. Those 4 ground floor units have direct access to the street, which was considered to be important in terms of the historical context, so the development doesn't turn its back on the surrounding development. And then you come through the rear courtyard off of Cowgate into a rear communal entrance to the upper flats. That area also serves the cycle parking, and there's bin storage there, and then there's a bin collection point closer to the street. And there's opportunity in there to get it's a modest area, but there's opportunity to get some landscaping within that appropriate to that sort of confined setting, which we could secure by a condition. If we just move on to the applicants prepared some illustrations. These are just illustrative, obviously, to show you the context of how the development would look. So that's looking over towards, you can see the bulk of Roy's in the background with the terraces in the foreground. And then the next one will show you looking across the Roy's delivery yard there. So the rear less formal elevation there, but still some interest within that context. And then the final one is just looking up Cowgate towards that negative vista of Anglia Square. So it fills more of the space, I suppose, blocks out more of the Roy's building. You can see the context. It is higher than the 2-storey terraces. There's no sort of moving away from that, but you also see it in the context of number 31 Cowgate that it is 3-storey. So there's been a number of revisions. We've been out to consultation on this a couple of times. The applicant has worked with officers to seek some, what I think are real positive improvements to the scheme. The application was originally for 23 units, 1-bed units. We've altered, the mix has been altered. We've now got 15 units of a mixture of 1 and 2 beds. The units also have dual aspect now, so that there's not properties just looking out one direction or the other. The heights come down slightly. The roof form's been altered quite significantly. We've reduced the number of dormers to reduce the apparent bulk of the roof accommodation. We've introduced those active frontages, like I say, so that people can enter the properties from the street and interact with the street. So there has been some progression in the proposals. The issues are set out in some detail within your report. The main issues were principal issues to do with loss of a community public house, which was previously registered as an asset of community value, loss of a locally listed building, so this is a locally listed building, and this would be demolished and then replaced with this new development. There was quite a lot of consideration of the scale and the form and the position of the development on the site, and whether that was appropriate in the context of the development in the area. The site's in a conservation area. And there are other locally listed heritage assets close by. So it's demolition, you know, the impact on the conservation area that's set out within the report. Amenity, there's amenity considerations for the new residents, given the proximity of Roy's delivery yard. There was a noise assessment submitted with the application. Environmental public protection officers have looked at that, considered that, and considered that the mitigation measures are acceptable. It's not a sort of massively busy delivery yard. And the mitigation in the terms of the glazing proposed, etc., is sufficient to mitigate any potential noise impacts. Also impacts on nearby residents, because there's been the objections from residents. Some of those objections focused on the impacts because of the increased height, because the existing building is 2-storey. The increased height, people would consider that they would be overlooked. The distances and the relative positions of neighbouring properties is discussed within your report, and it's considered that it's not going to give rise to significant levels of overlooking or overshadowing because of that increased height. It's a car-free development. There's no parking provided. It's in an area of controlled parking. Residents were concerned that it would add pressures to that parking, but there will be no new parking permits available for occupiers of this development, so it shouldn't give rise to any additional pressures on existing parking for existing residents. And also there was the issue, I think early on in the slides I mentioned there was a disabled parking bay. The development would need to see the loss of that parking bay because it's in the way of where the refuse collection vehicle would need to come to access the bins. But highways have said that through a traffic regulation order, we could look at alternative provision in the area if possible. So as basically it's considered that there's no unacceptable impacts on amenity as a result of the proposed development. So just finally, in conclusion, the loss of the community public house and the loss of the locally listed building is considered to be justified. That's within main issue 1 in your report. The design and scale of the proposals as revised I considered appropriate for the site given its historical and current context. The applications for the provision of housing, there is also the provision of a policy compliant amount of affordable housing, so three units are proposed for affordable housing. So this is a brownfield site in a sustainable location, and these benefits in terms of the provision of housing and affordable housing are considered to outweigh any disparate benefits or any harm to the loss of the locally listed building and the impact on any heritage assets in the conservation area. So the recommendation is for approval of the application, subject to the conditions that are listed on page 35 of your report, plus the addition of an additional condition to do with heritage interpretation based on the Conservation Officer's latest comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. We can have Councillor Osborne down to speak. He's not turned up. So we also got the applicant and agent here who are down to speak as well. They're not allowed to speak because Councillor Osborne didn't turn up unless I give permission, which I have done. Did you want to speak or not?
Well, I might as well.
Yeah, okay, you have 3 minutes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to address the committee. The applicant would like to thank council officers for their comprehensive report and the detailed advice provided during the application process. We're pleased that the principle of residential redevelopment is acceptable. The existing building's poor state of repair requires a level of investment that means it's not viable to operate as a pub, nor to retain as part of the redevelopment. It attracted no interest when listed for 5 years as an asset of community value, or during the 6-month sale moratorium. The housing officer welcomes the provision of 15 1- and 2-bedroom flats, including 3 affordable dwellings. In particular, the officer highlighted the local need for affordable 1-bedroom accommodation. The design has been considered in conjunction with the heritage specialist. We researched the history of the site and looked to address negative features identified within the council's character area appraisal, namely the Royce building and views along Cowgate. It reinstates the historic building line and reflects the height and features of buildings that occupied the site prior to the Second World War, and number 131 Cowgate, a 3-storey building which itself was once much larger. The scale of the proposal addresses the bulk of the Royce building, which is 13.6 and 17.8 metres high, comparable to a 5 to 6-storey building. It mediates between the scale of the commercial buildings and the Victorian housing, redefining the corner of Cowgate and Peacock Street. The flats exceed national space standards by as much as 20%. 12 of the 15 flats are dual aspect. All have generously proportioned sash windows and Juliet balconies, providing a high level of natural light and cross ventilation. A communal landscape courtyard, together with private terraces and ample cycle and bin storage, ensures adequate amenity space would be available, particularly given the location. The existing houses to the north of the site would be 24.5 and 33 metres from the proposal. The Victorian terraces located to the east of the site are perpendicular to the proposed development, with largely blank gables facing Peacock Street. Given this level of separation and the nature of surrounding development, the proposal would not lead to unacceptable overlooking, loss of outlook, amenity or light. As a car-free development, parking or disturbance problems are reduced, and indeed other potential uses could generate more traffic. No objections have been received from Transportation, Landscape or Tree Protection, Norfolk County Council, Norfolk Historic Environment Services, Norfolk Police, Anglia Water or Citywide Services, and the Norwich Society supports the principle of the redevelopment. The application is in accordance with local and national planning policy and would provide 15 dwellings in a sustainable location designed to exceed modern energy and water use standards. It incorporates ecological features and would positively contribute to the vitality of the area. Happy to answer any questions, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for that. Councillor Sands?
We're on to questions now, are we?
We will do when I say it, yeah.
Oh, right, okay, well, I have a question when we get on to that.
Yeah, we just want to know if the officer wished to respond to the... No, thank you very much. We will want questions now to the officer. Councillor Sands.
Thank you, Chair. I really like the idea of the street entrances for the ground floor flats. I'd just like to know, is it possible that these perhaps could be wider entrances and perhaps slightly wider internal doors to allow possible future adaptation for disability? I think that would be a good idea, but overall I really like the development.
Well, I think we didn't discuss that, I must admit. As ground floor units, there would need to be, there's a proportion that would be required to meet accessibility standards. It's that sort of mixed combination, isn't it, of having an entrance straight onto the street as well is something that can be intrusive, I suppose, to the internal living environment as well. So we didn't discuss that, but it might be, it then starts to have an impact on the sort of, what's proposed is sort of a pastiche, I suppose is how you say. It would start to alter the proportions of the doors from those sort of traditional narrow fronted elements, and it's that weighing up the balance, isn't it? The weighing up of the look versus the how you use the accommodation, but it could be something that potentially we could look at.
Thank you. Councillor Bergler.
I've got a couple of questions, if I may. So the first one is with regards to the pub, and that was listed as an asset of community value. Now, in the report, it says that lapsed in October 2020, and you had no community groups wanted to reinstate that, and there was no interest from community groups to buy the pub. Now, I'm one of the ward councillors. I was not aware that lapsed, so I don't know. Could you just explain how community groups would have found out that this asset of community value that lapsed, and whether councillors were informed? I'm not aware that that was the case, because it's, stating it in the report that is one of the arguments. I'd just like to find out a little bit more how residents or community groups would have been aware of this, because someone must have thought that that is a valuable asset to actually get it listed.
So my understanding of the process of asset community value is that the community group that put it forward to be an asset would have been notified should the property come up for sale. And then there would have been a period of time, 6 months, I think, for them to put together a bid. And during that time, if they don't put together a bid and seek to purchase the property, then external sales can happen, essentially. And that process would have been followed when the property was sold to the current owners.
And do we know who that community group was?
I think it's Canberra. Canberra usually do most of them. And if you look on page 17, Canberra's replied.
Okay, thank you. And my second question is with regards to the building line. Now, I've not come across this before. I know building lines are important, an important aspect that we look at in terms of planning. So far, when we've determined planning applications, we've looked at the building line in terms of the street context, where it is important that you have a building line and that not suddenly something sticking out and altering the context of the street and therefore the visual appeal of the street. Now here the applicant has chosen to use the traditional, so the historic building line. I mean, cynically, I would say to probably circumvent this and actually push it out right to the frontage. Could you just give us an explanation of how to set this into context of, you know, how am I supposed to use this historical building line, and how is that in relation to how we normally see the building line? It's not a very clear question, but I've never come across it before. So
Yeah, sure. Well, I suppose places change, don't they, over time. There were two approaches that could be taken with this site. You could have took the new building line that Roy's presented in the 1960s. So the back of the Roy's building, which is completely blank, has no entrances, it's just a blank facade that doesn't come right up to the back edge of the footway, and there are a couple of street trees there. So you could take an approach to continue that line and have a small, relatively small setback, and provide a similar form of accommodation with a small, almost like a front, probably not big enough for a front yard, but a setback to have a relief from the street. The problem slightly is that it's already a very constrained site. It's not the biggest site in the world. It's heavily overshadowed and dominated by the Roy's building that stands there. And if you look at the context of the residential properties that are there, they do stand hard up against the back edge of the footway. So they're not terraces that have a front yard. So it would be, we could try to seek a form of development that's set further back, but it's what benefit would it provide? It would probably it's not big enough to be a front garden. It would probably just end up being an unmaintained area that's, you know, full of litter and crisp packets, that sort of thing. So it's about trying to make a judgment of taking that historical context, the fact that development that's took place in this area that's previously had some bomb damage has you know, this pub was built in the probably late 30s, early 40s. The Roy's building was put up there in the 60s. I don't think anybody'd say the Roy's building is a magnificent piece of architecture, and perhaps in the longer term might not sort of remain in that form. So it was about trying to make a judgment of trying to get the best form of development, maximise the opportunity to redevelop the site given its sustainable location, and that, you know, yes, it was the design approach put forward by the applicant, but I think there was enough supporting information with it to be a form of development, like I say, that got support from officers.
Okay, can I just ask one question about the affordable houses? There's 3 on the site. Was there any discussion made about making them all affordable, so that'll be easier for a provider to actually go in and look after them all once they've all been built? Because if you only got 3 on the site, that'd be quite hard to get someone like Portland Housing or someone to go in there and just look after the 3 properties inside. And do we know if they're going to be on first floor, second floor, third floor? And how would that work?
It has come up in more recent discussion because we've been through a number of iterations of the development and the numbers have progressively come down. We've been in a position where the applicant hasn't done a viability appraisal, was waiting for a scheme to get a positive response from officers and see where they stood in terms of viability. In terms of 15 units, they considered there was sufficient, they could provide the policy compliant amount of affordable housing at that point. And that's sort of where it's like it's available and possible to provide it within the scheme. Housing have said 1 bedroom units would be sufficient. They meet the space standards. The next stage would be that the applicant would contact the registered providers to look at interest, whether they're interested in taking them in a mixed development, etc., etc. But with direct access to some of these units, then it is a possibility. If there are issues, there are housing associations operating in the very near vicinity to the site. It may be that a housing association would take it because it's close to something that's across the road, so they can deal with it, management that way. Worst case scenario would be if the applicant could prove that there is no registered provider wants to take the accommodation on, then we would be looking at off-site commuted some. But I think we've done sufficient as officers to secure a form of development that, they shouldn't be coming back and saying they're too small, they're not, the right sort of thing. It's set up as far as we can for a registered provider to take them if they would like.
Thank you, sir. Councillor Lovett.
Yes, thank you, Chair. On page 15, under the summary information, energy and resource efficiency measures, it says a fabric first approach will be adopted with water usage limited to 105 litres per person per day. Could you say what sort of water efficiency measures there will be? And I mean, do they really mean that it will be limited to 105 litres per person per day? Presumably not. And a second question is about the disabled parking bay. I hear what you say, that they will try and find an alternative location, but is there any way that we can condition that there is an alternative location? Because I know how precious these bays are to disabled people, to try and get as close as they can to the facilities that they need. And it would be a shame if it just was lost. And thank you.
On your first question, the 105 litres per person per day is sort of one of our standard conditions. It's relevant to what was the old Code for Sustainable Homes, Code Level 3, I think it was. So working on the principle that we work on an average of about 120 litres per person per day, and at the moment, at the time of the current of those building regs, and it's about seeking a reduction of water usage, and it's usually fairly straightforward measures that's often picked up by building regulations. So things like flow regulation taps, flow regulation showers, and things like that, which would bring the water usage down. No, we don't put a monitor on them to see whether they're complying with that, but it's about sort of there is a planning condition that requires them to meet that requirement, and if we felt necessary to go and enforce it, then we could go into a property and see whether those measures were in place to seek that reduction. On the second question about the disabled parking bay loss, I did press Highways about this, and I tried to explain a bit more in the report. So it is a relatively well-used parking bay, I think, a disabled parking bay for people using the North of Magdalen Street. Not so much, I think it was primarily there to serve the Gurney surgery, which is since relocated. But I think there's a possibility that the provision could basically be moved to the opposite side of Cowgate at the junction with Peacock Street. And the traffic regulation order condition would look at that, but there has to be done in conjunction with it being a safe location and there being sort of sweat path analysis to get around the junction, etc., etc. So we can't make them do something that's impossible, if you see what I mean. But it would be the best endeavours to see the re-provision of that in the close locality. Highways did say to me, well, actually, if you're a blue badge user, you can park on double yellow lines for 3 hours anyway. So that if there is provision from that form in the area, or alternatively, you can park in the Magdalen Street car park, and I think you get twice the amount of parking for what you pay as a disabled badge users. But the traffic regulation order will look at the feasibility and deliver that if possible.
And what about the cost of that traffic regulation order and things like that? I mean,
that's met by the applicant.
Yeah.
So it's to facilitate their development.
right. And just to come back on the water efficiency. So you're saying that okay, they sort of have low flush toilets and what they wouldn't use grey water or anything like that. I mean, I'm just trying to have an idea of this fabric first approach that actually does reduce the use of water. I mean, most people have they can put something in their system to make sure that you don't have too much water being flushed down. But what else are they using?
The fabric first approach is referring to the other energy, so the 10% energy generation, or we sometimes look at that in terms of energy reduction on a site. So the idea that you build a building that is as insulated as it can be to stop heat loss, etc., etc. So you start from those first principles. So that's the reference to the fabric first approach. We did have a conversation about, I did have a look at grey water recycling. The difficulty being with a flatted development as well, and this is essentially, although it has a pitched roof to the road frontages, the roof then becomes a flat roof. So all that sort of equipment you'd have to accommodate usually within a roof space to make it work. Otherwise, if it's on a ground, if it's in the ground, you've got to pump it, etc. So I don't think it'd be feasible on a development like this on such a constrained site. So it hasn't looked at those grey water recycling principles. The water reduction is through more sort of engineered measures, let's say.
Thank you. If there's no more questions, Councillor Stootley, and then Councillor Giles, and Councillor Graham.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to, in the absence of the ward councillor, who I think was going to object to this, I think we should probably address some of the concerns of the public. That was largely overlooking and shadow cast by the new development. So clearly, actually, we can see from that picture there, the terraces opposite, there's going to be some overlooking up the between those terraces where they have their rear gardens, and also the west view to the top right of the picture, where the sun sets will create some additional shadowing, I believe. So can you explain the impact of that, please? And also the outside space for the people that are going to live there, is that really adequate? Thank you.
So in terms of the impact on existing residents, that representation there shows you've got Cowgate terraces in the foreground, and just behind that there's Willis Street that runs parallel to it. So they both have a very small rear yard, and then there's a access alleyway that runs down between the two. Both of those properties on the end of those terraces have no, the one on Willis Street has no openings at all on its end gable. The one on Cowgate has a small window on it, on a sort of rear return element of it. It looks like it's possibly, I couldn't tell because it had a blind up, I think, at the time. But the distances there across the road, we've got about 10 metres to those rear yards. They're small yards that are essentially used for keeping your recycling, and they're not an outside garden as such, because of the space that's provided there. And I think the distance involved and the lack of windows and an active garden, I think that relationship is sufficient. On what you can't quite see, there's sort of greenery there on the right hand side. You've got properties, they're the front gardens of a terrace of properties that sits back from Cowgate, so those properties are set further back. The properties themselves are about 24 metres back from this development. Their gardens are quite, because they're their private garden is on a road, they've got quite substantial screening around them. They've got sort of a Lalandi hedge there. So yeah, that photograph there shows them in the distance. So over that distance again, that is window to window distance is adequate in terms to not give rise to significant levels of overlooking. It's a dense area of the city. You know, you've got terraces that look towards each other across quite narrow streets. It's not the additional height granted, you know, gives the perspective of increased overlooking because of that height, but the distances are representative of the area, and therefore I don't think the level of overlooking would be any different to the relationships that are around there at the moment. In terms of overshadowing, the Roy's building already does that. Because this development stands effectively to the north of the Roy's building, it's not going to give rise to any increased overshadowing of existing properties. The Roy's building already casts quite a lot of shade over this site itself. So the windows that face into that rear delivery area of Roy's will experience a lot more shade than the other windows. That's why it was important to, where possible, get as many dual aspect units so that they're not reliant on just looking out over a shady outlook. And in terms of the amenity space for the new residents, yes, it's small. It will be overshadowed by the bulk of the Roy's building. You can't get away from that. In this sort of location, it would not be unusual that a flatted development like this wouldn't have any amenity space at all. It's not unusual in this sort of dense North City area for flats to have very small levels of amenity. So I think we've done the best with what is available, really. It's that trying to get the balance right between, like I say, if we look at what Councillor Bogerline said, do we push the building back? Do you then end up with even less amenity space? So it's really trying to get the right balance of, it will give you you come into that courtyard area to access those 3 units, put your bike away in the corner, and hope, and we'll get some appropriate planting that could deal with shaded locations to sort of brighten it up a little bit.
Councillor Giles.
Thank you, Chair. Could you give some more detail regarding the conditions securing heritage interpretation, how far it will meet the proposals made by the Design and Conservation Officer? Thanks.
This came up sort of quite late in the day as a result of the comments from the Conservation and Design Officer, and we can work that through with the applicant. The intention was, the focus was, there was some quite nice stained glass sort of window, fanlight type window above the 2 entrances to the pub that has a tankard on it. We're not certain if it still exists. I think it still exists behind, the windows have been boarded up. A lot of I think the interior has been modernised, the best word of best explanation. So I don't think there's any historical importance necessarily inside, but it was just really trying to retain those elements of the pub and reincorporate them within the existing building, which we can, the condition will allow us to then, it's quite a broadly worded condition that allows us to seek appropriate heritage interpretation. So we do that in conjunction with the applicant and Conservation and Design Officer at the time.
Councillor Graham.
Thank you. I wanted to ask about the trees in the pictures on page 21. The tree officer highlights the importance of the existing tree, and I can see the diagram that has trees in it, and I can't quite place it. Perhaps you could say a bit more about the mitigation that's going with what I presume is the removal of a tree that adds a lot to the street scene as it is now.
The application came in with a arboricultural implications assessment and method statement. Basically, there's those street trees there. There was the one that's closest to the application site. The tree survey said, you know, if you remove it, you can do this. If you keep it, you'd need to do that. And basically, the tree officer said they're important trees. They're not on the application site. They need to stay. And therefore, as long as they follow the parts of the trees, the arboricultural information that deals with the retention of that tree and the sufficient tree protection measures to secure the development to take place without impacting on that tree, then there would be no loss of the tree.
Thank you. Any more questions? Okay, we will move on to recommendation. The recommendation is to approve. I want to move that and got a second. Councillor Button, thank you. Discussion, anyone? Anyone wish to? Councillor Bergeron?
So for me, it's quite finely balanced, because I think it would be a good thing to have housing at this location. But I think, so we've heard several times about the constraint of the site, and the site is very constrained. And in summary, it is too constrained to fit 15 flats on without completely altering the street scene and having a bulk there that was not there before, including a reduction, quite small amenity space for residents. So my overall conclusion, this is really kind of balanced on several factors, is that I don't think that the constraints of the site allow, without having a negative impact on the area as well as on the existing residents and future residents, to fit on 15 flats. You know, I understand that it's been come down from 23 flats, but I think, you know, in such a constrained site, it just doesn't fit in. I can express it in planning terms if we get to that stage, but that is my overall conclusion.
Okay, I'd just like to say I'm going to be supporting this. I think it's a good idea. It's a shame that the pub has gone to Paul's Tavern. I mean, I used to play fat in there in the 70s in the league. So that was a long time ago. I think the accommodation could be a little bit better than what is proposed, but I think on the site, the numbers have come down, and we've still got 3 affordable houses on there. If it come down any more, we will lose them completely. So the affordable housing bit would disappear because they'd be under a certain number. So I'm going to vote in favour of this, and I don't think that'll affect anyone else along the street or anything like this. I mean, in the pub in its heyday, and everyone used to go in there, there used to be a lot more people about and traffic about, and this will actually solve that problem, because there won't be no traffic about trying to park all the way around there. So that is a great shame that the disabled space is gone. I'll definitely be voting in favour. Councillor Sands?
Thank you, Chair. I noticed in the notes there was the suggestion that the original building or footprint be retained and a fewer number of units, which simply would not be viable. Those, as you've already suggested, it would mean any affordable places would go. It would also mean the unit price would increase and probably make them undesirable, poorly priced for the area, so to speak. In other words, too expensive for the area where it is. I think the development is an excellent use of the site. Bringing it out to the footpath or the original building line simply restores something which existed in the past. And the reality is that pub is never ever going to reopen as a pub. Simple fact. out on Maitland Street with a number of pubs along there, which are sort of well patronised. Mischief is one that comes to mind further up the road. And that in a tucked away area is not going to open as a pub. And I think this is an excellent use of the site.
Councillor Stooten.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think this is quite finely balanced. There is clearly going to be an element of overlooking, but I think it's been adequately described as less than substantial. I actually quite like the building line coming up to the street and following traditional lines, and hopefully the Roy's building will be removed in due course, and that line can continue. On balance, I'll be voting in favour of this. I think the applicant got lucky that the site was beyond repair. Thank you.
Great shame. Councillor Lovett.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I think the building does block out some of the negative aspects of Roy's, and I'm glad that there will be there is to be 3 affordable units in the 15 housing units. Glad that it's car-free development and it's got active ground frontage. There's quite a few things going for it, but I think what's not going for it is the fact that it is so dominating in the street scene. What that area is calling out for is a bit of softness and vegetation, and perhaps a sort of half a dozen trees in the area that was once a car park. If you had less properties and they cost more, I just feel then so be it. But I think it's sort of just trying to put too much on this small site. And I am disappointed that the design and conservation officer did pick up that it's not special enough. It doesn't pick up on local aspects or vernacular or anything. And so it could be anywhere, couldn't it, really? And they hadn't even thought about interpretation of its past. I mean, just saying that we will make sure that there's something acknowledging that it was a public house, and whether it's called the Blueberry Music House or, you know, the development's got to be called something, but or what it used to, pub used to be years ago, just something. And so this could be a development anywhere. And I say, more than anything, I just think we need to have a something that just offers some green vegetation around it and better amenity space for the residents. And going back to the issue of water conservation, when are we going to wake up to the fact that the UK, in the UK, the East Anglia is the driest place? Anglian Water are now starting some scheme whereby we have water smart meters so that people can see how much they're using and you know, try and cut down on it. You know, are these going to have water meters? With that smart meter in, that facility for seeing how much water you're using and trying to sort of conserve it. There's also now innovative ideas where you can wash your hands in a sink, the water's collected underneath and used for the toilet to be flushed. I mean, there's simple things that when you do it, when you build the building, it's so much easier than retrofitting. And we're already talking about the problems of not having enough water, and yet we're building without really giving any consideration for that issue. So I'm a bit disappointed that this is just a bit ordinary and not really special enough for anywhere in Norwich, but this area just needs a bit of a lift, and I think we need something of better quality. So disappointed, really.
Okay, I was going to say you saved all the water the pub used. I'm not. Is there any other discussion? Yes, Councillor, I've got your name, I can't really read it. Champion, that's it, thank you. Sorry about that.
I gather, so originally there was more affordable dwellings on the site and that's been reduced. And I find that, I mean, I'm reiterating, I guess, what you said. I find that disappointing that actually, considering the state of housing in the country at the moment and the need for affordable housing, I'm a little bit baffled why why that's being reduced. And I know I should have said that during the question stage, I guess, but.
We can answer that as well.
Can I ask that?
Yeah.
The number of affordables would have been reduced as a result of the total number of units being reduced. So it was never a 100% affordable scheme because the number of units has changed so much. We've always insisted that you need to start with a policy compliant amount, which is 30%. So once we were happy that 15 was the appropriate amount, then that's where the 3 came from. But obviously, if 23 units would have been accepted, then you'd get 30% of that. So that's why there has been a corresponding reduction in affordable housing, but it's not a reduction in the total proportion.
Can I just clarify that the scheme is policy compliant on affordable housing because there's a vacant building credit which is taken into account for the demolition of the pub. We can't insist on anything more. So the 3 dwellings, even though that doesn't appear to be 30% because of vacant building credit, that is policy compliant.
Okay, thank you. No one else? We move, Councillor Sands.
Just one little thing for Sarah. There's some fantastic black and white photographs. Is it possible you can email those to me? Because I'd like to have a closer look at them, just for my own personal interest.
Yeah, that can go on our website, or one of the
There's a
website.
heritage statement and there's information there. Which should be, I can send you a link.
Well, you won't find me on there, Councillor Sands. Right, we move to the vote. All those in favour, please show.
Chair, sorry. It's a recorded vote, Chair, so I'm going to call names, please. Thank you. Please keep your hands up until I've called your names, please. Thank you. That's Councillor Sands, Councillor Giles, Councillor Everett, Councillor Button, Councillor Peake, Councillor Maxwell, Councillor Driver, Councillor Stookley.
All those against, please show.
Those members voting against are Councillors Lubbock and Bogeline.
And extensions.
Abstentions are Councillors.
Price. Oh, no, you
I
don't,
just
yeah.
can't remember. Councillors Graham and Councillors Champion. So
Thank
that
you.
is carried, Chair.
That's carried and that's passed. Thank you. Do anyone want 5 minutes before we next or not?
Councillor.
Yes, if we
Councillors, wait for the next one.
if we could just have 5 minutes, and we come back. There is Councillor, which is great. Councillor.
Check with them.
Okay, thank you. We are back on camera again. We move on now to our next and last planning application, which is 4B, and this is for the application on 24 to 28 Prince of Wales Road. And if we can ask Jacob to take us through the report, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good run here, okay? It's correct volume. Good morning. Today we're looking at an application at 24 to 28 Prince of Wales Road for the removal of part of the existing flat roof to create an open roof terraced area and bar at second floor level. This application was submitted alongside 2 applications for general refurbishment and advertisements on the exterior of the property, which have been approved under delegated powers. Get to the next slide, please. The site has formerly housed several late night and club uses, and the site is currently operating at ground floor level at numbers 24 and 26, bar and beyond the current occupants. Site's located at the top of the western end of Prince of Wales Road. St Face Lane is located to the rear of the site. Uses in the immediate context are generally commercial, with some residential units located on the upper floor of buildings on Prince of Wales Road, as well as to the rear of the site on St Face Lane and slightly further afield. As you can see from this photo, the site covers 3 addresses, including a new infill building, which was granted permission in 1997. This building serves as an entrance to the upper floors of the site. The use of this part of the building ceased in 2008 and has been vacant since, along with the upper floors of the property. However, the ground floor of numbers 24 to 26 has been in continual use. Numbers 24 to 26 are locally listed, and the site is located within the city centre conservation area. In addition, the site is located within both the late night activity zone. If we just go through some of the site photos now to give you an indication of the general feel of the site and its immediate surroundings. This photo is not actually very good, but you can just see the top of the site in between the 2 trees in the centre of the picture. And it's just to sort of show that the site is located in an area that's generally characterised by historic buildings and commercial uses with a strong focus on the nighttime economy. Just the next slide, please. This is the front facade of the building. Though there's currently building works to the front elevation, you can see that the front facade has a relatively strong character, defined by these kind of large arched windows and quite distinct flat roof design. Just the next slide, please. And this again is a view of the building that doesn't really show you the building so much, but if this is from the top of St Faith's Lane, and you can see there's the sort of flat roof section on the top of that pitched roof is the top of the flat roof of this site. And you can see that the relevant part of the building is kind of separated from the rear of St Faith's Lane by existing buildings and the car park to the rear of the Norfolk Club on Upper King Street. Just the next slide, please. And again, you can see the top of the property in the middle of the picture there. Again, this photo just kind of emphasises the separation of the property from public access points. This is from slightly further down St Faith's Lane, where the road sort of curves around to come closer to the building. This is an aerial photo of the site. You can just about see the site outlined in red down at the bottom. These photos kind of show that the immediate surroundings of the building are largely defined by sort of generally commercial character, with the supporting infrastructure for these uses located to the rear of the buildings. However, it's important to reiterate that there are residential properties located along Prince of Wales Road on the upper floors of the buildings and to the rear of St Faith's Lane, as well as slightly further away in the Cathedral Close and further down St Faith's Lane to the east. And just to the next slide, please. So just to describe the proposal seeks to reconfigure the second floor of the building by removing part of the existing flat roof to create an external area used in association with the general nightclub use. The area is intended to be used as a smoking area with seating and a separate bar service. The flat roof will retain a partial overhang, so the changes would not be visible from street level. They'll be hidden behind the existing parapet on the building. The applicant has proposed that the space will be usable from 10 AM to 4:30 AM Monday to Saturday, and between 10 AM and 3:30 AM on Sundays and bank holidays, in conjunction with the use of the overall club. There has been a reasonable degree of public interest in this application. We've received 18 letters objecting to the scheme and 1 in support. The issues relating to the application can be summarised under the following categories: the principle of development, design and heritage, and amenity, particularly in relation to noise impact. Regarding the principle of development, it's important to note that the application does not create a new nightclub use. It will bring a part of the site that's not currently used back into use, but the use as a nightclub is pre-existing. Alterations to the building are acceptable in principle, therefore the acceptability of the proposal relates only to how the external alterations of the building affect the overall impact of the existing use. In terms of design and heritage, we're confident that the physical alterations to the flat roof will not alter the significance of the locally listed building. The existing flat roof is a modern addition, and the physical alterations will not be visible from the street level. The increased use of this part of the building will create additional vibrancy, particularly during the daytime, which will impact positively on the overall character of the street scene. The majority of representations received relate to amenity issues, with a strong focus on noise impact. The applicant has provided a noise impact assessment outlining projected noise levels from the proposed terrace in relation to residential addresses on Prince of Wales Road. This document concludes that noise generated by the terrace will fall within the World Health Organization guidelines for acceptable environmental noise in relation to the nearby residential properties on Prince Wales Road. Environmental Protection have reviewed this document and suggested that unacceptable noise is most likely to occur after midnight, when the club use typically becomes busy. A number of mitigating conditions have been suggested to reduce the overall noise impact. Ensuring that alcohol cannot be sold nor amplified music played beyond midnight will decrease the general use of noise levels on the terrace during the most sensitive times. In addition, a noise limiter should be installed to ensure that music is not played above a certain level on the terrace at any time. Whilst it's acknowledged that there will be a degree of noise after these restrictions come into effect at midnight, it's anticipated that this will be more akin to typical smoking areas located elsewhere in the area and acceptable from a noise perspective. Further concern has been raised about the impact of leaving doors open, which would carry over noise from louder parts of the premises. It's suggested that a condition is applied ensuring that doors should only be opened when exiting and entering the terrace. These are the main concerns highlighted. All other concerns raised by objectors are addressed fully within the report. There have been no formal updates received, so in summary, the application has been referred to the committee due to objections to a minor application. It's concluded that the impact on design, heritage and amenity related issues is acceptable in accordance with the local plan and the national planning policy framework. The recommendation is to approve with the following conditions attached. Within the standard time limit, in accordance with the plan submitted, no sale of alcohol on the second floor after midnight, no amplified music on the second floor after midnight, a sound limiter to be applied for amplified music played on the second floor, and for the terrace doors to be kept closed except for entry and exit. And just for your information, Richard Divey is kindly here from Environmental Health to answer any technical noise related questions that members may wish to ask.
Thank you very much. We have got 2 speakers, and the first one is Councillor Price, and you have 3 minutes, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Committee. I represent the local ward. A number of residents have contacted me about this, and I believe there's been a number of submissions. The noise is obviously a main factor here. This is obviously an increase. This is a cumulative increase. You can see under the noise policies set out in the planning policies from central government that having this cumulative impact of additional noise, needs to be taken seriously and needs to be considered very closely. I believe that the mitigation ideas have been put forward, but however, I question the ability to be able to actually enforce these as well. So you might be making conditions, but will these actually be enforceable? And let's be clear. I mean, the average time that somebody is spending smoking a cigarette will be, 2 to 3 minutes. If you have a number of people, number of turnings in and out, you're going to have both doors swinging in and out. You're going to have a lot of noise. through this time. So you're creating a new area, an outside area, which is backing on to residential. It's backing onto the cathedral there. It's backing onto St. Faith's Lane. And currently there is no noise going in that direction. Everything is on that side of the street. Effectively, you've got the noise, you know, there are no terraces that way. You're creating a new noise problem, okay? What I would also say is that if the sound assessment has taken place, is effectively only addressing the concerns of Prince Wales Road, residents that are living it there. Clearly that means it's not taking into account residents of the cathedral. Could we bring the slide up, please, of the geographical land, just to point out where those properties are at the cathedral? And those properties, yeah, so there you've got a range of properties. If you could hold it just still there, you know, back at the closest point of the cathedral housing, you've got housing right there, okay? That's close, and you're pointing it effectively in that direction. You're not taking into account the new noise impact on St. Faith's Lane. So what I think you've got here is you've got cumulative noise that's coming in that direction, which is unenforceable to control. The doors will be swinging. Irrespective of a cap at midnight, you've got people, you know, they'll be working night shifts. You've got people that will be, you know, needing to get up early in the morning, etc. That will need to be able to rest. I don't subscribe that this is actually going to be creating an additional positive impact on the actual changing streetscape of the area of the city. You know, and customers could potentially go outside. An area could be cordoned off outside. So the reality is that I think it's undue noise. You can see it from the policy and my submission earlier that effectively, you know, this is too much noise to be allowed, and so the committee must refuse it. Thank you.
Councillor Price, and we also have the agent and applicant here. Robert Bicker, no, that's the wrong one. Stuart Trent. If you do have 3 minutes as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for letting us speak today. Just to reiterate that this application has already been considered at length by environmental health, by your own environmental health department as part of the planning process, with the outcome that they believe that no noise disturbance will be caused. Also by the expert acoustician who worked with your own environmental and health department, who concluded that no noise disturbance would be caused. Also by your own planning department, having taken all the advice from the expert and from your own environmental health team, including your own public protection officer, concluded that no noise disturbance would be caused. It also went through licensing about a month ago in this very room. All these issues were considered at length. The acoustic expert and your environmental health team were here and were quizzed at length, and all confirmed to the satisfaction of the licensing committee that no noise disturbance would be caused. And just moving on to the specific points raised by Councillor Price, the Prince of Wales Road residents are considerably closer, I don't have the exact number, but distance, but considerably closer than the residents to the rear. The terrace is located at the Prince of Wales Road end on purpose, so that it is as far away from the more sensitive properties at the rear as possible. There is already a smoking area that serves the bar and beyond, which is closer to the residents at the rear on the cathedral side. So this is further away than that existing facility. And as I say, just to reiterate that whilst the comments Councillor Price raised are perfectly reasonable, they have all been considered both by your own environmental health team, by the expert acoustician, with the guidance fed back to planning, and the decision by unanimous agreement from everybody that's looked at it, including the licensing committee, was that no noise disturbance would be caused.
Thank you. Questions to the officer? Oh, Jacob, did you want to come back on any of those 2 points first? Take questions. Councillor Maxwell first, Councillor Button, Councillor Sands, Councillor Graham.
I've not been on the licensing for this one, so I don't know. As it's a rooftop bar, and you want to complain about the noise, how do you get in to complain? Have you got a telephone number that you could issue, or would they have to go in through the pipe for themselves? As I wasn't on the licensing, I don't know the answer to this, but sure. Yeah.
Councillor Stooney, did you want to quickly answer that?
Separate legislation.
Yeah, don't forget it's separate. Yeah.
Say again, please.
Separate legislation.
Yes,
Three lots
it
in.
might be handy for the committee to have a bit of context. Though, just to come back to the applicant, the committee did not accept that there was no noise disturbance. We accepted that the noise survey showed that it would not be unacceptable to the local surroundings. There will certainly be noise emanating from this venue. And for the benefit of those that weren't on the committee, there is the conditions that the licensing department put in were similar to this, so that no music after 12 o'clock, and the bar will close at 12 o'clock on this particular floor. However, people will be able to take their drinks up and use the space beyond 12 o'clock, so that's worth knowing. And also, there is a phone number will be provided for residents to contact, and also they are to. One of the conditions was that they need to post a notification 1 week before they open, highlighting their intention to open and the procedure for complaints. So there are some mitigation conditions in place, and also with licensing, which, as Jackie pointed out, is separate. It can be changed. So if there is a issue in the future, if this is given the go-ahead, it could come back to a licensing committee for extra conditions to be added if necessary.
Thank you, Councillor Stootley. Councillor Button next.
Thank you, Chair. As I understand it, as the nightclub operated before, they were actually using the car park as a smoking area, and they could go out on the Prince of Wales Road. So will this negate them having to go out in the back area making noise? So I understand that has caused noise problems in the past. So that's actually going to keep people within the building at the top, instead of them going out in the back car park or out on the Prince of Wales Road. Is that correct?
As I believe that the current smoking area is used for bar and beyond, and this area will be used in association with the new nightclub, which is accessed from the infill building to the site. So my assumption is that both will be used.
Yes, they will be able to use. There's two different venues. Well, they said no, but. Jacob, can you clarify that? That they can still go out in the car park, or they can still go out in Prince Wales Road?
The idea of the smoking area is to stop people from smoking on Prince Wales Road. And I don't believe the car park is currently used in association with this use.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sands.
Three questions, if I may, and I'll try to make them as quick as possible. On page 45, item 19 mentions acoustic noise indices, no appropriate model, but aren't there already one or two rooftop terrace bars in Norwich from which gauges and measurements could have been taken? And also on point 9 on page 44, nationally the policy is to discourage smoking. Should we be encouraging this through the provision of this terrace? And my third question is, at some stage in the future, when this area is proved to be a bit, well, not very nice in inclement weather, when it's, you know, freezing cold, raining, snowing, and there's an application to put a roof over it and screening, that would create an area of, you know, 75% or more enclosed space, which would then negate the area as a smoking area for national legislation. If that arose, would such an application then be turned down?
in relation to the point on the type of modelling used, point 19, that refers to the data set on the acoustic software that's been used for creating the noise impact assessment. The closest model that the applicant could find in relation was beer garden noise without music, and part of the assessment for environmental protection has been sort of caveating that model with additional sort of penalties to try and create a more realistic sound model. In terms of the discouraging smoking, I'm not sure that's within the scope of this application to take that into account. And in terms of any future applications to enclose the space, it is entirely hypothetical. So any future application would have to be assessed on its own merits if it were to come in.
Councillor Graham.
Can I just add to that, the floor space that we're looking at is already in nightclub use. So if it could be used right now for that use, this is an application to remove the roof, so which will increase noise. If it were to have a roof added back on in future, then that would obviously lessen the noise.
Councillor Graham.
Problem, what problem? It's quite depressing to hear the noise concerns dismissed institutionally when our experience tells us that people who live near rooftop gardens, their experience of noise is very different to the lack of impact that we're promised. Also, I'd like to know how this is going to add to daytime vitality unless the place is going to function as a coffee bar during office hours, which I'd actually be quite happy with, but I don't think that's the story. What residents justifiably fear is this is going to add massively to their sleep disturbance that they're already experiencing. The license has been agreed on condition, and if the noise is really as negligible as we're led to believe, then perhaps keeping it under review wouldn't be a problem. And if the noise that residents anticipate actually happens, then maybe those hours could be limited to midnight if there's still a problem. If there isn't, it's not an issue. But I'm very sceptical of that claim. Also, can you explain how it helps daytime vitality, as was claimed?
Jacob.
Sure. Well, I'll respond on the point about daytime vitality. The proposed opening hours are from 10 in the morning. So it's anticipated that the space will be used during the daytime. It's currently a completely blank frontage and has been for the past 13 years. Having people up and using the space will increase the sort of general vibrancy of the building from a state of disuse to being actively used in the daytime hours. I'm not sure if Richard might want to respond to the other points.
Sorry, I've already forgotten what the other point was, to do with the noise.
Yeah, residents have every reason to be sceptical about homes that there will be no noise problem.
Yes, when we talk about noise and noise indices, we don't talk about zero noise. We talk about whether this noise will cut through other noises and be noticeable and how it will happen. Quite often what you get in city centre areas is a hum of noise from many sources. And it's whether you can identify noise is the issue in this sort of situation. Which is why on the side of caution, we've said, well, if you are opening after 12 o'clock, there shouldn't be music noise, because we have what's called the Lombard effect, whereas if you have a beer garden and you play music to people, people start talking louder. people are, having been in a nightclub, already desensitized to noise, but then will speak louder. So what we're doing is by managing the noise up to a certain time with noise limiters, so the noise doesn't bleed out the premises and affect other residents, so that they are focused on that noise. And after midnight, there'll be no sales of alcohol, so that it reduces the amount of people that are likely to be there for long periods of time. And the reduction in the, having no music noise after that time will mean that when they are there, they will not be talking over the noise to make themselves heard to other people, which very quickly snowballs into talking over each other, because you're talking louder because the person next to you is talking louder, and you get this effect where just people talking can be extremely loud. And for example, I've been to a local theatre area where they have an outside area, and just people talking has been 98 decibels, which is not far off what you would get on the dance floor of a nightclub. So talking noise can be loud, which is why we have this modelling that we said wasn't perfect, which is why we said that we need to add a little bit of a penalty on top of that modelling, because it was perfect.
Thank you. Councillor Graham?
I'm just wondering how a noise limiter works for talking noise. I mean, obviously you can turn down an amplifier, but how do you turn down somebody's conversation?
Yes, absolutely. The noise limiter is there to make sure that, as I say, the music doesn't bleed out to local residents. During the early evening, there's two different factors here. Nightclubs don't really operate as nightclubs until very late. So it won't be massively loud on the rooftop. It will be there just to give people some atmosphere through the day. So I believe that under the licensing, I can't remember if it's the same here, that we're doing up until 11 o'clock, it's one level, and that will be assessed as this level. People in those local residential uses won't think, why is there music noise coming in above all the other noises that go on? And then that will reduce after 11 o'clock at night to a lower level, because at that time we're expecting more people that are using the premises as a nightclub who may be speaking louder, and that will help reduce that Lombard effect to make sure that the people noise isn't then causing the issue. After midnight, with the no sale of alcohol and the reduced numbers up there, just people going there for smoking, then there shouldn't be a huge amount of people up there talking louder, causing an issue. So it is sort of a staggered effect from past experience in the area of taking noise recordings on Cathedral Street and St Faith's Lane. The noise levels drop very dramatically after 11 o'clock because they're dominated by road traffic noise up to that time.
Councillor Bergline.
I've got loads of questions, I'm afraid. So if I can just pick up on the discussion around noise. So I understand that you've put a penalty on that modelling. I'm not, I can't quantify what penalty you put on, but your descriptions just now, I mean, there is a massive difference between a beer garden, not only the music, but also the time until which it operates, probably the drunkenness and potentially highness of people, the desensitization when they're in a nightclub, all these factors, I think, to me that, justify the matter. I don't know if that is quantifiable in the penalty you've given, but it makes me doubt the conclusions that without being able to know whether that penalty is enough for all these factors, it makes me doubt the conclusions with regards to that. Just that, then I have other questions, but just on the noise again as well. So you say obviously on St Faith's Lane, so the main drowning out noise is car noise, which then drops off right at the time where the noise from that rooftop would actually start up. So that's another thing that that makes me wonder whether this would actually be a bigger noise disturbance because of that. And if I can come back, but if you could just address those two things first, and then I've got other questions as well.
Yes, first, on the penalties, we haven't imposed a penalty. What we've said is that without a penalty, the noise impact assessment quantifies it as being 1 to 2 decibels under the WHO limits, which only start at 11 o'clock at night. So up until 11 o'clock at night, without the WHO limits, there's not an issue. It is well below any indices that we're using. When the WHO kicks in at 11 o'clock at night, it is 1 to 2 decibels under that. So we said that there should be a penalty because of the desensitization of people and you know, the other factors that you have said, which is quite right. And that would mean that it probably will be slightly louder. Normally, when we look at penalties, the normal penalty is 3 decibels for, you know, and going up, and then they add on if there is different influences like intermittency, i.e. short-term shouts. And then there's other things for if it's frequency related. So, and to put that in context, 3 decibels is a doubling of noise. It's twice as much. So we're saying that if you put a 3 decibel penalty on it, which would take it over that limit, we are saying it is twice as loud.
So that as a conclusion, your noise assessment then means that it would be over the allowable or desirable WHO noise after 11 o'clock.
This is for a specific issue in the WHO, which is LA max events, which is normally in this situation would be someone shouting. So WHO says that you can have between 6 and 12 LA max events in the nighttime period, and adding to those is not a good idea. So what we're saying is that because this is close to that, we need to reduce the likelihood of those LA max events happening by reducing the noise there, so people are less likely to shout very loudly during that time.
So we've got the issue that the noise report underrepresents the actual noise, and that if we put on penalties, sorry.
The noise report hasn't, because none of the indices that measure beer garden noise include the LA max events, they haven't had a penalty because there's no legislation to say what the penalty should be. We've gone on the side of caution and said that, you know, originally this was till much later in the evening. If we're wanting it much later in the evening, we believe that penalty should be imposed.
Okay, my last question to you, is there, I mean.
I think you need to go through the chair and not have a discussion between the two, aren't you?
Can I ask one more follow-up question, Chair, please? And is that
yeah, and then I'll decide who wants to answer it, I think.
Okay, so my last question is, I find it, is there really no noise model out there that models something similar? Is beer garden the best we could do? I mean, I find that quite surprising.
Well, that's nothing to do with this application.
It has, because that's what they come here with.
Well, there's no one taking the seismic readings down as well as well when a volcano go off in Italy, but there ain't nothing out there at the moment to do that.
Do you know for sure, Chair, that there is no noise modelling other than beer garden that would fit this scenario better?
No, I don't.
That's my question, and I'm sure Richard can answer.
I can confirm that there's no better modelling if there has been suggested.
Okay, thank you. Am I allowed 2 more questions?
Yeah.
Others? Okay. So, I mean, there's talk about other smoking areas as part as a justification that there are other smoking areas in the area. Could you just explain where they are and whether there are any that are actually rooftop smoking areas as well?
I mean, I think the most obvious example is the smoking area at Mantra, which might be more difficult to point out. on the map, but it's just a little bit further down. It's just around about there, and it's obviously not a rooftop level, but it operates, as far as I know, to similar times and much closer to residential properties. The property directly to the east of it has previously had consent for residential conversion, with finding that the impact was acceptable.
And do you know if it makes a difference in terms of how the noise travels, whether it's on a rooftop or whether it's on the ground?
What counts is line of sight. So normally when you're on the ground is at that level, so it will cause some absorbency, which would reduce the noise. So when you're up on a rooftop, you will lose that. But in this situation, there are walls completely surrounding the rooftop here, way above head height. So most of the bulk of the noise will go straight up. So it can make a difference, but it will be negligible in this case, and that is modelled into the North South.
Councillor Stutley?
Yes, thank you. One further condition that's quite important here is that the environmental health will set the limits with the applicants, and also that will be under constant review, so it can be changed at any time. So that's quite important. But going back to what Councillor Graham was saying about noise, I think there is going to be significant noise here. There's no doubt about
Is
that.
that a question or is that in the discussion?
No, it's not a question.
Because I can, we'll have discussion in a little while. We're starting questions to the planning officer.
I'll save it for discussion.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any more questions to the? Can I ask one that seems, I don't know, I might be getting picked on it as a smoker, but are you saying at night time, after a certain time, that'd be used for smoking and not anything else? You won't be able to take your drinks out there or dance out there, so.
You will be able to take a drink up.
You will be able to take a drink up.
Yeah.
So, because when I smoke and I go outside, I don't take half the pub with me because they don't smoke. I just can't see this smoking area being crowded with non-smokers.
With no music and no.
No,
service,
so
the
there's
idea
no
is that
reason for them
there's no
to.
incentive for people to do that.
That's what I thought. Okay, no other questions. We'll move on to discussion now, and I'll move the recommendation is to approve. Have a second, Councillor Button. Thank you very much. Discussion, anyone? Ian, Councillor Stutley?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was going to say that the licensing committee made a determination based on the legal evidence that was put forward to us, rather than what we actually think is going to happen here. I think the applicant is taking a big risk with this investment. I think there will be some significant noise that comes from this particular unit. I hope that the modelling that we provided is accurate and that it does go up instead of out. The licensing committee has the ability to change the conditions associated with this space if it becomes necessary. We do have other rooftop terraces in the area, and they have created a noise disturbance. Complaints have been received, but as yet no review has been requested. So I would remind members of the public and ward councillors that there is a review process that the licensing committee can go through for this and any other venue that's causing a noise disturbance or any other delicensing objectives being breached.
Councillor Chapman?
It occurs to me that we are mid-pandemic, and to have an open air space isn't necessarily exclusively good for smokers. I haven't been I haven't, if I was to go to this venue, I would probably find myself going outside because I'll most likely feel uncomfortable being inside. And it just occurs to me that the dynamic of venues has probably changed over the last couple of years. And whilst I appreciate the noise concerns, which are completely valid, it also strikes me that open air areas within nightclubs or pubs are incredibly valuable. There's a lot of people who maybe aren't smoking. So, you know, and it just occurs to me, I thought it was something which was worth saying and hadn't been mentioned. And I thought, being that we're mid-pandemic, it's probably worth bringing up this point.
Yeah, very good point. Councillor Bergeron.
So I think we have to remember that we're the planning committee, we're not the licensing committee, so we make our own decisions. And I think here we need to decide on whether this affects the amenity of residents. So, you know, no matter what the licensing committee has determined, my own, from what I hear here, and no one doubts that there will be amenity issues. I think there is cumulative impact from different venues, from different smoking places, and this will add to it. So in my assessment, and given that we have a noise report that is, you know, that makes me doubt whether the conclusions are what they're going to be. I do think there will be issues in terms of amenity, which is one of the material planning considerations that we have to think about. So therefore, I'll be voting against this.
I'll be voting in favour of this, let me just say now. I think this is a good idea. I'll probably never ever go into this place ever anyway. But if I did go in there and I do actually smoke, I would actually go up and use the smoking bit. It's better to be up there and inside the building, well, not inside, outside the building up the top, than it is to go out onto the street on Prince of Wales Road. The amount of pubs, and we all have to, anyone who smoke now or use these machines, I know at least 2 people in here use them. We have to go outside pubs and stuff. Now, we don't get told off for being too noisy. I've never been told to keep the noise down because I'm outside having a cigarette with my friends. And as I said, you know, if you're a group of 10 people, not all 10 on you smoke, and not all 10 on you will walk outside and start chatting away outside because of this. And you are right, Councillor Chairman. I mean, outdoor space at the moment is fantastic for pubs and for outdoor cafes and restaurants to use the outdoor space because it's a lot safer than being indoors at the moment. But we haven't had a lot of complaints about noise or anything from any of these gardens or anything around there. And I think Prince of Wales Road, I think you might actually keep the noise down for people not being on the street, arguing with people coming down the street and everything what goes on Prince of Wales Road. They'll be contained in their own area. And I gather there'll be nightclub staff there to monitor it and to make sure to keep the noise down anyway. So I'll be voting in favour of this, even. So I think that's probably a good idea for the venue. Councillor Sands.
Thank you, Chair. I do respect your opinion, but I am completely opposed to it. I am of the opinion that there will be a significant impact on the local amenity. I'm concerned about the effects of passive smoking that the terrace bar staff and other nightclub staff will be exposed to. I remain unconvinced about the drifting from the elevated area of the effects of noise, that the spikes in laughter and loud conversation, not the background hum, and also of the smell and fumes from the smoking area over the whole area. Being in an elevated position, the effects of this are going to be amplified over the area. Therefore, I cannot support this application.
Can I ask the planner, is there anything to do with planning?
No, we can't take into account the impacts of smoking on health or the smells that would arise from that.
We're talking about amenity here, and that's a significant impact on the amenity of local residents.
If a piece of equipment were being installed that caused an odour issue, that would be a material planning consideration, but the use of an area for smoking doesn't involve any physical works that are going to cause odour, and I don't think we can take it into account, I'm afraid.
Councillor Lowy?
I believe the elevated position of this smoking area is of significant impact and will have a massive impact on the quality of life of nearby residents, with this drifting of the smell of smoking and the associated fumes.
Councillor Lowy?
Yes, I think it all comes down to management really, and I think the managerial staff will want to make sure this works well and have the ability to go out and take action, not on the amount of smoke, but on the amount of noise that might occur if there's an incident or something, which it happens. But one has to have confidence in the management of the premises. They want to make it work. They don't want hassle. So I'd vote in favour of this, especially listening to the environmental protection evidence.
Next one.
Thank you, Chair. I live on a street that has now become a street of outside restaurants. And at the time, I was quite worried about people smoking and drinking outside. Yes, it's gone up. But the most noise that we get is when they're putting the tables and chairs away. And then they tend to meander around. And the smoking, the smokers do stand in groups. I've got double glazing, so it doesn't bother me. But there is an element of that, and there's an element of making noise, as you say, because they want to talk above the whatever's going on. But I have to admit, I was really not looking forward to it, but it hasn't been that bad.
Councillor
I think we really need to distinguish here. This is a nightclub where people go once they've had a few drinks, and where people are exposed to really loud music, and when they go outside, and I've, in all honesty, I've probably spent nights on rooftop of nightclubs, so and I don't smoke, so I just don't think we can compare that at all. It's a very different setting. It's going to be a very different noise level. It's going to be a very different way that people talk and laugh. So I think it's not comparable to a pub or an outdoor seating area.
Councillor Adam, Councillor Giles. Sorry.
Thanks, Chair.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Sorry, was there an issue?
I didn't know. Jackie
So-
heard something. Someone said
Does
something.
somebody make a comment? Because
No.
I've heard him. Yeah.
No. Councillor Giles.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I've read all the papers and listened to all the evidence. I think with the mitigation measures in place with regards to the noise and the conditions that we've attached, with the fact that it won't be visible from the streetscape, I'm minded to, on balance, vote in favour of this. Yeah, now I was quite cynical coming into it, but on balance, I'm minded to vote in favour.
Councillor Sutley.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Bogaline's right. This is a planning decision, and actually, in planning, it gives us more scope than in licensing for decision making, and especially taking into account some of the amenity levels outside of the space. But I think on balance, and it is finely balanced for me. I think I'm going to vote in favour based on what I've already heard from the management, and that they do appear to have a real interest in making this work. And of course, if they don't, it can come back to licensing in the future. So I'm going to vote in favour. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to say? Councillor Button.
Thank you, Chair. On balance, and bearing in mind that the whole of this area is enclosed by 4 walls, and part of the overhang of the roof is still there, that's going to keep some of the noise in as well. So with the measures that the company have taken, which are really high, I can't see anything wrong with an approval of this application. Thank you.
Councillor Sands.
If indeed there are sort of fairly high walls all around and the area is still partly overhung by a roof, then I would argue that it breaks the 75% enclosed rule, which means it goes against the regulations as far as smoking areas go.
Is that part of planning?
No, no, we can't, we're not interested in whether smoking is legal in this area. We're just talking about the removal of the roof.
Yeah. Councillor Button.
Just as an aside, have we had any representation from NHS or anybody regarding this application?
Well, that don't come into it either. No. It's the same as the pub having an outside smoking area. You go into some, they look like they're inside. They're really illegal, which I agree with Councillor Sands, but some of them, you stand outside, just keep blowing to death. So I'm not sure if this one is legal or not. I think it is because it's got the whole roof off. Is there any more comments? Councillor Champion?
I just want to clarify. So the planners advise that this is within the parameters of the World Health Organization acceptable sound?
No. Oh, sound.
Yes, it's sort of, we have concerns that if it went on past midnight with music and a bar open there, that it would exceed the World Health Organization limits if you put on a penalty. The application was drawn back to midnight, and the not using rather the sale of alcohol and the music was brought back to midnight to reduce those later night impacts in the area.
Okay.
So just for clarity, in a similar way to when, you know, like if I'm listening to a housing application and it's not as environmental as I would like it to be, but it falls within the parameters of what's acceptable, like, you know, you've got a certain amount of social housing, and therefore within the parameters of planning, I've got to vote but this is acceptable under the rules of what planning, this fits with, this ticks the boxes. Am I correct? No or yes?
In planning policy, are we all right to be doing questions? Okay. In planning policy, we don't have a strict limit on a certain amount of noise. But we use the experts within the council to assess noise impact assessments on a case-by-case basis to determine whether it exceeds certain national levels. So if we're getting advice from environmental protection that something is acceptable with certain mitigation measures, then we are satisfied as planners that ticks our policy.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move to the vote. The recommendation is to approve. All those in favour, please show.
Chair, it is a recorded vote again. So those members voting in favour are Councillor Giles, Councillor Button, Councillor Peake, Councillor Maxwell, Councillor Lubbock, and Councillor Stukely and Councillor Driver.
Thank you. All those against, please show.
Those members voting against are Councillor Sands, Councillors Everett, Councillor Graham, and Councillor Bogle, sorry.
Okay.
Any
extensions?
Those members abstaining are Councillor Champion.
Thank you. So it's been agreed that it was passed. Thank you very much. That's the end of planning committee. Can I thank every member for turning up and for the applicants and the councillors for talking? And we'll see you next month. Thank you.